It was the kind of winter that made the world feel like it had stopped spinning, dead still, frozen, cruel. The snow came down early in November, and by mid-December, it hadn't let up for more than a day or two. By January, the cold was so deep it felt like it crept into your bones and stayed there, like an infection that didn't care about penicillin or prayers. We live in a small town up north, just a few hours from the Canadian border. Not a lot of industry here anymore. A couple of small mills, some seasonal tourism, and a gas station that doubles as the town's gathering spot. I worked part-time delivering propane and firewood, odd jobs on the side when folks could spare the cash. But there wasn't much work to go around this winter, and even less money. Our old furnace gave out right after Thanksgiving. Loud bang one night, then silence. Cold silence. I tried everything, checked the lines, banged on the pipes, even watched a dozen YouTube videos in the hope of reviving it. Nothing. The damn thing was over 20 years old, and we didn't have the cash for repairs, let alone a new one. My wife, Rachel, kept asking, "What are we gonna do?" She's the worrying kind. Always has been. Even when things were good between us, and I'd be lying if I said they still were, she could worry the color out of a rainbow. Lately, though, she wasn't worrying so much as complaining. Saying things like, "Maybe we should stay somewhere else," and "I can't freeze to death here just because you're too proud to ask for help." I wasn't too proud. I was just trying to fix things my own damn way. I made up my mind to build a wood stove myself. It wouldn't be pretty, but it'd get us through. I'd seen it done before, using an old barrel, some scrap pipe, and fire bricks. There was enough junk in the shed out back to make something work. I told Rachel to go stay the night with our neighbors while I worked on it. They had heat, and the Thompsons had always been friendly, especially Ed. He was a big guy, maybe 10 years older than me, ran the hardware store before it closed down. His wife Linda was the kind that always brought casseroles over if someone sneezed too hard. Just for the night, I told her. Let me work in peace. I can't think straight when you're pacing. She didn't argue. Packed a small bag and left that evening. I stayed up late, working with gloves that were stiff from frost. My breath was fog in the dim yellow light of the garage. I cut through metal with a dull hacksaw, burned myself twice on the torch, and drank coffee that tasted like ashes. But by morning, I had the thing halfway assembled. Just needed to fit the flue and insulate it right. I took a break just before dawn, walked across the field to the Thompsons' house to check on Rachel. Figured I'd bring her back for breakfast and show her the progress I made. Linda answered the door in a thick robe and sleepy eyes. "Oh, hey. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just came to get Rachel. Stove's almost ready." She looked surprised, hesitated. "Oh. I think she's still asleep. You sure you want to wake her?" "Ed's still asleep too." I stepped in anyway, brushing off my boots. "Yeah. I'll just go up." She didn't stop me, but she didn't smile either. Their house was warm, smelled like cinnamon and bacon grease. Made me resent my frozen fingers even more. I padded up the stairs quiet as I could. The door to the guest room was closed. I knocked once, soft. No answer. I opened the door and the warmth hit me first, then the stench of betrayal. Rachel was under the covers, all right. But not alone. Ed's back was to me, bare and broad and pink like a pig roasting in a smokehouse. Rachel's leg was tossed over him, and her hand, was resting on his chest like she'd been living there her whole life. The blankets were tangled and halfway off the bed. I could see everything. And I mean everything. They didn't hear the door creak. Didn't hear the floor groan under my weight. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably 10 seconds, swallowing something heavy and bitter that wouldn't go down. I didn't shout. Didn't throw the lamp or punch Ed in the back of his fat head. I just backed out of the room like it was a crime scene and shut the door. Downstairs, Linda was staring into a coffee cup at the kitchen table. She didn't look up when I entered, but she spoke. "You saw, didn't you?" My voice came out cracked. "How long's it been going on?" She sighed. "Couple weeks, maybe longer." I didn't know at first. "But Ed. He gets careless. So does your wife." I didn't sit. I didn't blink. I just stared at the steam rising from her cup. "I'm sorry," she added. "You didn't deserve to find out like that. Why didn't you say something?" She gave a half laugh, tired and mean. "What was I supposed to say? Hey, your wife's screwing my husband while the town freezes over? This isn't soap opera stuff. This is real life. Real quiet, too." I nodded slowly. Everything in my chest was tight. My heartbeat didn't even feel like it belonged to me anymore. "She used to come over just for warmth," Linda continued. "Then she started wearing makeup at night. Shaving her legs before walking through the snow. That's when I knew. Women know. You ever confront them?" I asked Ed once. He didn't deny it. Just shrugged. Said, "It's cold. People get close." Like it was normal. She looked at me then, for the first time, and her eyes were harder than I'd ever seen. "It's not normal. It's disgusting. And I've had enough." I looked out the window toward the shed, where the metal stove waited in pieces. "Yeah," I muttered. "Me too." I walked back home in the snow. Each step crunched like bones underfoot. The sun had come up by then, but it didn't bring any warmth. Just light to see the truth better. In the shed, I started working again, but something had shifted inside me. My hands weren't just building a stove anymore. They were building something else. A plan. A sentence. A way out, or maybe a way through. Rachel came back late that evening, pretending nothing had happened. Said she stayed longer because she'd lost track of time, and Ed was watching some movie she liked. I nodded along. Said the stove would be ready soon. I didn't mention the bedroom. Didn't mention the leg draped over Ed like a dog marking territory. Instead, I started wiring the stove in a special way. Just a little trick I remembered from an old buddy in trade school. If you route the grounding wrong and create a deliberate short behind the casing, then add just a little moisture or skin contact, well, it could make for a shocking surprise. Literally. I would test it first. Make sure it wouldn't hurt me. Just enough voltage to fry someone if they touched it wrong. Especially if they were together. Especially if they were wet. Especially if they were careless. Rachel wouldn't see it coming. Neither would Ed. I didn't feel guilt. Not then. I felt focused. Because in the bitter heart of winter, the cold wasn't what killed you. It was betrayal. And I had no plans to let it slide. 2 days passed. The kind of days where the air felt sharp enough to cut skin, and silence hung in the corners of the house like cobwebs. I didn't say much to Rachel, and she didn't ask why. She probably thought I was sulking. Probably figured I'd pout for a while and then move on like a good little husband. She had no idea I already had. I told her the stove needed one more test before we could use it regularly. That it was delicate, experimental even, and needed dry hands, certain procedures. She nodded absently. I could see her eyes drift toward her phone, toward the door, probably wondering when she'd next sneak off again for warmth and Ed's flabby arms. But I watched everything. I knew the time she left. I knew how long she stayed. I knew which boots she wore and what perfume she sprayed before going. My wife had turned into a stranger, and that stranger had become a liability. By the third morning, the stove was ready. I'd gutted an old electric heater for parts and rerouted the wiring into a custom metal mesh just beneath the surface of the stove's steel base. It was perfectly normal to the naked eye, but touch it at the wrong time, when the wrong switch was flipped, and it would turn into a quiet executioner. Linda came by that evening under the pretense of returning a borrowed baking tray. We spoke in the driveway. "They're at it again," she said flatly. "Thought you should know." I figured. I looked up at her, snowflakes catching in her gray hair like ash from a dying fire. "Tomorrow night." She blinked. "What happens tomorrow?" "They come over," I said. "All three of us. A little celebration. I tell them the stove's ready, we light it up together, like a fresh start." "And then?" I didn't answer her. Just gave her a look that was more than a look. A confirmation. A warning. A goodbye, maybe. Linda didn't protest. The next day I woke up early, collected dry wood from the shed, and cleaned the floor of the main room spotless. I made the stove shine. Ran the wire discreetly through the wall, tucked behind baseboards. The kill switch was set inside the hall closet. One flick and it would pulse full current right through the stove's frame. Rachel was extra cheery that day. She thought she'd won. Maybe she thought I'd finally given in. She wore her tight jeans, the ones she hadn't worn for me in months. Lipstick, too. That soft red shade she claimed she didn't like anymore. "Ed and Linda are coming over tonight, right?" she asked, stirring a pot of soup like nothing was broken. I told them to bring wine. We could use a night that feels normal. Normal. I nodded and kept my face neutral. "Yeah. Let's celebrate the heat finally coming back." That night they came. Ed wore one of those smug grins like he'd just bought the place. Rachel stayed close to him, always glancing his way like they shared some private joke. Linda was quiet. Distant. She sat on the far end of the room, near the window, sipping wine without a word. "I gotta hand it to you," Ed said, squatting next to the stove. "Didn't think you had it in you. That thing looks solid." "Oh, it is," I said, flipping the hatch open and feeding in 3 logs. "Should warm the place up in no time." I gave Rachel the honor of lighting the first fire. I even handed her the matches. She looked touched, surprised. Maybe even a little guilty. It didn't matter. The fire caught quickly. Flames licked the inside of the barrel. Smoke curled up through the pipe and out the chimney. The metal began to glow faintly with life. And then I said it. "Touch it," I said, with a small smile. "Feel how fast it warms up. I'm proud of this one." Rachel laughed, nervously. "You sure? Isn't it too hot already?" "It's still ramping up. Just touch the side, real quick. See what real heat feels like after weeks of freezing." Ed chuckled and reached forward without hesitation, like the idiot he was. "Don't mind if I do." "No." Linda's voice cracked the air like thunder. Ed's hand froze inches from the metal. Everyone turned to her. She stood, clutching her wineglass so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes flicked to mine, uncertain for a second, then she backed down. "Sorry. I just thought it might be too soon. You know, for the metal. Safety first." Ed rolled his eyes and sat back down, brushing her off with a grunt. Rachel narrowed her eyes at me, something twitching in her expression. "You're acting strange," she said. "Like this is all some kind of show." "You're the one who said we needed warmth, Rachel," I replied calmly. "I'm giving it to you. To both of you. Don't you think that deserves a little appreciation?" Ed smirked. "He's right, Ratch. You've been writing him about the heat for weeks. Now the guy builds a stove with his bare hands and you act like he's trying to poison us." Rachel said nothing, but her smile was tight. Artificial. Linda stood in the background like a ghost, quiet and still. I caught her eye for just a second. That was the moment. If she blinked, flinched, said the word, I'd call it off. I'd flip the switch back and let it all disappear into silence and frost and shame. But she didn't. I walked casually to the hallway closet. Hang on, I said. Let me grab a blanket in case it gets drafty again later. Ed grunted. Rachel sipped her wine. I opened the closet and leaned in, not for a blanket, but for the switch. My fingers hovered over it. All I had to do was flick it. One click, and the wiring would surge. The metal of the stove would come alive with an invisible scream. And if Ed, or Rachel, touched it again, it would look like an accident. Like faulty wiring. A tragedy in the middle of a brutal winter. But then I heard something. Laughter. Low, soft, and intimate. I turned slightly, just enough to see through the narrow crack in the closet door. Rachel was leaning into Ed, whispering something in his ear. Her fingers were tracing circles on his leg. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a performance, for me. They knew I knew. And they didn't care. That was the moment something shifted. A darker clarity settled in. Killing them would be too quick. Too merciful. They wanted to humiliate me? Fine. But now they'd be part of their own undoing. I stepped out, smiling. Never mind, I said. Guess we don't need the blanket after all. It's getting real warm in here. Ed was sweating a little. Rachel looked pleased with herself. Let them think they'd won. Let them get comfortable. Because I wasn't done building yet. No, this stove was just the start. The real fire hadn't even begun. They left that night laughing. Rachel kissed my cheek in front of them like nothing was broken. Like she hadn't just been wrapped around Ed's sweat-slick body 2 days ago. Her breath still smelled like cheap red wine and secrets. Linda left without saying a word. She looked at me once, from over her shoulder, just for a second, then disappeared into the dark like the snow had swallowed her whole. Inside the house, it was quiet. Too quiet. The fire in the stove crackled on, innocent and warm, the way a good lie always is. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and a pencil and started sketching. Not blueprints. Not wiring. Something better. A plan. See, killing Ed and Rachel outright wasn't enough anymore. That'd be the kind of justice you see in a cheap movie. Quick. Loud. Final. But this was real life. And real punishment is slow. It wears you down. It makes you wish you were never born. So I came up with something better than a wire trap. I decided I'd build a second stove. But this one wouldn't be for heating. This one would be for hiding. Over the next week, I acted like everything was normal. Smiled when Rachel laughed, even though she stopped doing it with me and only did it when her phone lit up with Ed's name. I split wood. Shoveled snow. Bought groceries. I was the perfect husband. The ghost of a man she thought I used to be. Meanwhile, I worked at night in the basement, under the floorboards. I found an old crawlspace that ran beneath the house, back when the place still had coal heating decades ago. I opened it up. Cleaned it out. Reinforced the wooden beams. Wired a second system down there, lights, a lock, ventilation. And I built a hatch no bigger than a manhole, hidden beneath a worn old rug just behind the stove. It was slow work. Quiet. Careful. Rachel didn't notice. She stopped noticing things weeks ago. One morning, I made her pancakes and asked if she wanted Ed and Linda over again soon. Maybe a rematch of that trivia game? She smiled. That sounds fun. Ed's so quick with answers. I nodded. Yeah. He really is. The part she didn't know? Linda had already been over again. Alone. She knocked on my back door one afternoon when Rachel was at the grocery store, and I let her in. "I'm tired," she said. "Tired of pretending this is okay." I made her coffee. Told her what I'd been building. She didn't scream. Didn't run. She just sat very still, and when I finished explaining, she whispered, "And then what happens to them?" I looked out the window at the falling snow. "Then they get to live. Just not where they think they will." Linda looked down at her mug and said, "I want to help." The next part of the plan was easy. I told Rachel we should have a dinner party. To thank them, I said. For letting you stay when it was cold. Letting you warm up. It's only right. She smiled. That's a good idea. I'll wear something nice. I bet she would. But the warmth she'd find this time. It wouldn't be Ed. It wouldn't be fire. It would be the silence of a box underground. Waiting. Listening. Enduring. Just like I had. The snow had begun to melt, leaving behind a landscape of slush and mud. The harsh winter that had gripped our town for months was finally loosening its hold. But inside me, a different kind of storm was brewing. The betrayal of Rachel and Ed had ignited a fire within me, one that no amount of melting snow could extinguish. I spent my days in the basement, working tirelessly on the hidden chamber beneath the floorboards. It was a small space, just large enough to hold 2 people. I reinforced the walls with soundproofing materials and installed a ventilation system to ensure they could breathe. It was a prison, but a humane one. I wasn't a monster, I just wanted them to understand the pain they had caused. Linda had become my confidant in this twisted endeavor. She visited often, bringing supplies and offering suggestions. Her own betrayal by Ed had left her hollow, and she found solace in our shared mission. Together, we planned every detail, ensuring that nothing could go wrong. The day of the dinner party arrived. Rachel was unusually cheerful, humming as she prepared the meal. Ed and Linda arrived promptly, carrying a bottle of wine and a dessert. We sat around the table, sharing stories and laughter, the tension beneath the surface palpable. After dinner, I suggested we move to the living room to enjoy the warmth of the stove. Rachel and Ed settled onto the couch, their bodies close, while Linda and I sat opposite them. I waited for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to set my plan into motion. But then, an unexpected knock at the door shattered the illusion. I opened it to find a man in a suit, holding a briefcase. He introduced himself as Detective Harris, investigating a series of disappearances in the area. He had questions about Ed and Rachel, who had been reported missing by their families. I feigned ignorance, inviting him in to discuss the matter further. As we spoke, I noticed Linda growing increasingly nervous. She excused herself to the kitchen, and I followed shortly after. There, she confessed that she had informed the authorities about our plan, unable to live with the guilt any longer. Betrayed once again, I felt the walls closing in. Returning to the living room, I found Detective Harris examining the stove. He asked about its construction, and I explained it was a homemade project to combat the cold. He seemed satisfied with the answer but requested to inspect the basement. I led him down, my heart pounding. In the basement, he noticed the recently disturbed floorboards. He questioned me about them, and I claimed I had been repairing a leak. He nodded but didn't seem convinced. After a thorough inspection, he thanked me for my time and left. That night, I dismantled the hidden chamber, removing all traces of its existence. Linda had disappeared, leaving behind a note apologizing for her betrayal. I was alone once more, the weight of my actions pressing heavily on my conscience. In the end, I realized that revenge had consumed me, turning me into the very thing I despised. The fire within had burned too brightly, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold hadn't left. It clung to the windows like frostbitten fingerprints, reminding me that winter still had a hold, even if it was growing weaker. I sat alone in the kitchen that morning, staring into a half-empty mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Rachel wasn't there. She hadn't come home the night before. Her coat was gone. Her phone charger too. I knew what that meant. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just empty. Like the inside of that stove after the last log turned to ash. After Linda turned me in, after the detective's visit, after I tore down the hidden prison I'd built beneath the floorboards, after all that, I should have been grateful. I should have seen it as a narrow escape. But all I could feel was failure. And something worse than that. Alone. By noon, I heard the familiar crunch of boots in snow outside. The door opened. Rachel stepped in, carrying a suitcase. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. "Where were you?" I asked without looking at her. "With him," she answered plainly. No shame. No effort to lie anymore. "But it's over now." I turned. "What?" She sighed. "I told Ed I couldn't do it anymore. I needed to figure myself out. I was wrong to lie to you. But Linda, she told me everything. About your plan. The stove. The trap." She dropped the suitcase by the door like a soldier throwing down her weapon. "I thought I hated you," she said. "I thought I loved him. But now I don't even know what's true anymore." I stood, slowly. "You came back because you felt guilty. Maybe. But also because I don't want to end like this." Her voice cracked then. "I thought about driving out of town this morning. Just disappearing. But something pulled me back here." I walked to the window and looked out. The backyard was covered in a sheet of thawing white. Nothing moved. "You told me once," I said, "that heat was love. That without it, things died." She nodded slowly. "I think you were wrong," I said. "Love is cold. It doesn't burn, it preserves. It freezes everything in place so it can't fall apart." She came toward me. Carefully. Slowly. "What happens now?" she asked. "You tell me," I said. "I want to try," she whispered. "If you'll let me." And for the first time in months, I wanted to believe her. But before I could answer, someone knocked on the door. I opened it, expecting to see Linda, or worse, the detective again. Instead, it was a young man. Pale, skinny. Nervous. "You're Mr. Tyler?" he asked, holding out a folded note. I took it. The kid left without a word. Rachel stood behind me, arms crossed. "What is it?" I opened the note. It was handwritten. Slanted script. Definitely Linda's. I couldn't let it end like that. I had to finish it for you. "Meet me at the cabin. You'll know which one. It's done." I looked up at Rachel. She was already shaking her head. "No. Whatever it is, let it go." But I couldn't. Whatever Linda meant, "It's done," that echoed louder than anything else. She had betrayed me once, yes. But maybe not fully. Maybe she hadn't stopped the plan. Maybe she'd just postponed it. Adjusted it. Or maybe she'd gone ahead with it without me. Which meant someone, maybe Ed, was now in the dark, hidden place I had built. The place no one should be. "I have to go," I said. Rachel tried to stop me, hand on my arm, but I shrugged her off. Grabbed my coat. Took the truck keys from the hook. Outside, the sun was low, bleeding orange across the snow. I drove out toward the woods, toward the cabin we used to visit in the early years. The one only Linda and I knew about now. It was dusk when I got there. The cabin sat half buried in snow, chimney long cold. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching hard on the crusted ice. Walked to the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was still. Empty. Almost. There was something beneath the floorboards. A hatch. Just like the one I had built at home. My stomach dropped. I pried it open, heart thudding in my chest. And inside, cramped, furious, sweating, was Ed. Bound. Gagged. Eyes wide with fury and terror. Linda's voice came from the shadows behind me. "I couldn't let you waste the design," she said. "You built something perfect." I turned, and she was smiling. Holding the switch. "But you were never going to use it. You still had hope. That's why I had to." "Linda," I said, stepping toward her. "I lost everything," she whispered. "Because of him. And she betrayed you. So now we start over. Clean slate. You kidnapped him." She laughed. "You designed this, remember? I just followed your blueprints." I looked back down at Ed. He was crying now. I didn't know what to feel anymore. "Go home to your wife," Linda said. "You both get to start over. Let me have this one thing." I looked at her. Then at Ed. Then I closed the hatch. Not because I agreed. But because I couldn't carry it anymore. The fire had spread to someone else now. And sometimes, you just let it burn. I stood there for a long moment, the hatch closed beneath my feet, the weight of silence pressing in from all sides. Ed's muffled sobs echoed faintly through the thin wood. Linda's eyes gleamed cold in the dim cabin light, not triumphant, but something else. Something I didn't expect. Vulnerability, maybe. Or exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I wanted to protect you. Protect us. But he had to pay." I shook my head. "This isn't protection. This is a prison." She gave a bitter laugh. "Sometimes the only way to keep the heat alive is to burn everything around it." Her words twisted in my chest. For all my anger and hurt, Linda had been a constant, a reflection of my own darkness made flesh. But this was a new low. Rachel. Ed, Linda. Me. The tangled web we'd spun, unraveling one thread at a time. I looked down at the hatch again. "You have to let him out." She didn't answer. "I'm taking you all home," I said. "No more traps, no more hiding. We face this, whatever it is, together." Linda's eyes softened, just a little. "And if he doesn't forgive us? Then that's on him. But I'm done building prisons." The words tasted like ash. But they felt right. I pulled the hatch open. Ed blinked up at me, his face pale but grateful. As we climbed out of that cabin, leaving the cold and secrets behind, I realized something hard. The fire inside me had burned through the worst parts, the rage, the betrayal, the desperate need for revenge. Now, all that was left was the flicker of something fragile and new. Hope. The snow had finally melted away, replaced by the muddy thaw of early spring. The air smelled different, wet earth, fresh beginnings. But inside, I still felt the chill from the winter's grip, a lingering cold that no stove could fix. Rachel, Ed, Linda, and I, we had been through hell and back, caught in a web of betrayal and fire. We came home from the cabin that night carrying more than just the weight of our secrets, we carried a fragile truce. Days passed. We tried to rebuild something like normalcy. Rachel and I talked. Ed and Linda kept their distance but stayed around. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. It was something else, the uneasy silence that follows a storm. One evening, I was alone in the kitchen. I noticed the old wood stove, sitting quietly in the corner. I hadn't used it since the cabin incident. I walked over and opened the door. Inside, nestled beneath the ashes, was a small, folded piece of paper. Curious, I unfolded it. It read, "If you're reading this, then you survived the fire, the one inside and out. But here's the truth you never saw coming. None of this was real. Or at least, not entirely. You weren't just an ordinary American boy caught in a harsh winter. This was all a test, a game, something designed to see how far you'd go when pushed to the edge. Rachel, Ed, Linda, actors. Your wife, your lover, your friend. The stove, the trap, the cabin, setups. And me? I'm the one who pulled the strings. Why? Because sometimes, the coldest winters reveal the fiercest fires. Welcome back." I blinked, stunned. Behind me, the kitchen door creaked. There stood a man I didn't recognize, calm, composed, eyes sharp as ice. He smiled. "Did you enjoy the story,